Hello.
Hello.
Was that a heavy pour or was it a medium pour?
Oh, just a small.
Just a small.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting in my bedroom. In fact, I'm sitting on the bottom bunk bed with the microphone on a chair. So it just seems a little. It seems a little like summer camp to be pouring a glass of wine for myself on a Friday night.
So you are in Italy.
If I were to be in Italy, then I would be in a place called Val Taleggio.
Val Taleggio,
which is like Taleggio Valley, which is like Cheese Valley, basically. It's interesting in the sense that because there are 8 of us, and all those things that happen from when you're really young, which is meeting people and things being exciting and new, and then finding a rhythm, and then seeing that they've gone out without you, and you think, wait, is that because like all that sort of stuff that happens?
Does that still happen?
Yeah, maybe it's just me. Is it just me? I hope it isn't. I hope it isn't just me. This is a podcast in which 2 friends talk about the pleasures, absurdities, and imperfections of being human. I'm Simon Ellis.
And I'm Lee Miller. Welcome to Midlifing.
Hey, did you get any feedback from the last couple of episodes, the dual episode?
I've had a little bit, but I'm curious to see what your feedback was.
I've got one bit, I think, in particular that I think is worth mentioning. And it was someone who was a bit upset. Their feeling was that you and I got caught up in trying to understand him and not dealing with, well, how the fuck is this person, this woman, going to go back and go to work and keep working with this man? Like a very direct kind of, that's the sort of, according to this person, the key problem, which is to go, how does this person handle the situation, as opposed to us trying to, not in an abstract way or more theoretically, but trying to sort of understand the behavior.
Yeah, that's a really painfully accurate representation of our conversation.
It really is, isn't it?
Yeah, I have a response which doesn't, I think, probably doesn't defend. It simply gives context, which I will give. The reason we didn't have that conversation is I know the answer, and because I'd had a conversation with the person who'd sent the message in the first instance, I asked her directly, "How the fuck are you going to go back to work?" And she said, "He has been retired."
Oh.
Apparently there was some other behaviours as well. Now, it's interesting that it's the other behaviours that resulted in his retirement, not this particular one, because she didn't disclose this to her employers. So she doesn't have to go back to work with him. But that, I think, doesn't remove the anxiety of the upsetness of the person who asked the question, because I think, yeah.
Well, certainly a blind spot on my part. I think it's probably not surprising that you and I dwell or maybe slip into, or, it's like the path of least resistance is to understand and consider, let's say, broadly speaking, masculinity. So, and again, that's not a defense at all, because I fully understand how this person was frustrated by our conversation, or pissed off, or however they described it. But anyway, I thought it was pretty interesting, that's for sure.
Yeah. And can I, in an unironic and non-hedging way, say, I'm really sorry.
Yeah, I did respond. My response was quite obviously for people who listen a lot, these are not scripted conversations. We don't go, hey, let's talk about this and then talk about this and talk about this. And so, and part of, I suspect what we think of as their charm when we get it right, is the sort of sense of, following our noses and the kinds of the divergences and the tangents and following those and then occasionally circling back and sometimes not. So yeah, there's a very strong sense of them being improvisational and the possibilities of failure or of just getting it really wrong, which is not, this, I don't mean that as a defense so much as, because I'm not trying to defend or say that we were right on the money, but it's a little bit more context, you might say.
So Simon, tell me anything.
Well, you want me to change the subject?
Just tell me. Massive record scratch.
Okay. It's a strange thing, making things. Making art is strange. I wonder how many of our listeners even have done that kind of thing or made anything that made them think, do they know what it is that there's that thing where you don't know what it is that you're making. I think that's the thing that's really tricky. Like if I set out to, I work with wood really well and I go, I'm going to make pencil case. There's a sort of sense of having some sense of where it's going and how to get there. But I'm deep in that land of not knowing either of those things, what it will be and how to get there, even if I did know what it was I was getting to. My days are like a series of meetings with a version of myself, with the most doubt-ridden or doubt-riddled version of myself, but also takes tremendous pleasure in that not knowing. It's a very strange kind of bifurcated experience, and it's such a pleasure, but also terrifying. So that's quite strong. Maybe this is getting into areas of expertise here, which is dangerous.
I think the danger of it, it's quite delightful though, Simon, because we do spend a lot of time wading well out of our depth into things that we have absolutely no right in commenting upon. And I kind of am really interested in this idea of you having literally relocated yourself into a completely different context, challenging yourself at a kind of a daily basis that you're not with your life partner. You're also not in the, you've
I'm in another language.
Out of the home. Yeah, but there's more existential stuff happening before you even get to the language. You've moved out of your home that you've been in for 15 years, 13, 14 years. That just seems like a lot. So, you're in this very sort of churny place, throw in a different language.
So yeah, it feels very, in fact, I used when we were talking about, we had a sort of workshop over the weekend, I used the word, the feeling of discombobulation, and it sort of became a word for these younger artists who are working for the week, and I think the word is scombussolamento in scombussolamento, I think is the word in Italian, and they really hung on to this idea of, yeah. It was beautiful talking. Sorry, I'm talking a lot here, but it was beautiful talking.
No, I'm listening a lot. It's really nice.
Beautiful talking to them. So these are young artists, almost all Italian. Their English was pretty remarkable. And talked to them a lot about... And so a lot of what we're talking about is the climate emergency and what it means to make art in that context, and just talking to them about their sense of having grown up in this, that for some, really it was all they could sort of think about. And it was fascinating to hear them talk about the weight of that in their lives, that there was nothing else so there was something about the kind of like something had been taken from them, and that's something that Greta Thunberg has talked about, that her life has been stolen by these other generations. I think I'm not sure if that's quite the word she's used, but so yeah, really beautiful, and their sort of sense of hope, and just beautiful. And lots of walking. We're right in the middle of the mountains, and it's pretty isolated. Like, it wasn't easy to get here. 2 trains. 3 trains and 2 buses.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we ride out in the sticks, as they'd say in Australia. And but it's pretty special. Yeah, very, very special. And I do feel, I dangerously use the word, feel very privileged to be using this time and trying to get into it.
We've talked a lot in the past about your that sense of being drawn towards Italy.
Yes.
As a place that you might live. Does something different happen when you are physically there? Do you see yourself there differently? Does it make you? Does it hasten the urge? Does it make it feel more remote? Well, I'm just curious what it does, because you don't go to Italy a great deal, or you haven't been.
Well, this is the first time since 2019, so pre-pandemic. So it was a strange experience when I arrived in Milan and I went for a meal. I stayed a night in Milan because the train trips were so long, and I was really nervous about using my Italian. It's it's quite strange because what happens, I tend to speak quickly, which is just the worst thing because people just don't know what the hell you're saying. I like the question because What's so different now, of course, between now and would have been, I guess, November 2019, is that my language skills are so much higher that there's a sort of sense of normality, like I've crossed a line into being able to participate here, a line that I had never passed before. So it doesn't feel quite so odd.
I think I'm curious about how it is to be there for you, because some of the guy ropes that tie you down to the UK have been loosened.
They sure have,
haven't they? In quite an explicit way. So that sense of I wonder what it feels like, if it feels more like, oh yeah, this is happening, this is coming towards me.
Yeah, I don't think of it like that. I don't tend to be. I don't dwell a lot in the future, and I tend, if I were to dwell anywhere, it would be in the past, which I don't like. But I think maybe all of us human beings, we tend towards future or past. I'm not sure, but so I tend to be a little bit. Oh, this is what's going on now. But I think what's very different is the sense of people accept you and are comfortable speaking in their language to you.
Yeah.
So it's not like there are times for sure, but it's not like there's an entire struggle going on with it. Oh my God, I've got to speak to this guy in Italian.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of that, I suspect, but I don't know how to answer your question. It's I think the ties and the sense of I guess curiosity about this country and its problems and its bureaucracy and its beauty and its the generosity. I mean, there's extraordinary generosity here that I find deeply, deeply moving.
That generosity, is it something that you don't feel in the UK? And you can answer that in a way that I can't, because you have lived in at least 2 other land masses before you got here. Admittedly, 2 places that I would imagine are quite heavily influenced by British and American cultures.
They are. It's true, New Zealand, and they're a strange mixture of those cultures too. Yeah.
So I know that you're already kind of you were brought
steeped
up in
that.
Yeah, I was going to sort of almost say like you were in a prism of those cultures. So it's like that, but reflected slightly differently at you. So it's it's its own thing. But I do wonder, do you find that sense of generosity different or more present in Italy than you do in the UK?
Yeah, and I think there's something, and you have to be careful. I have to be careful though, because of course London is not the UK, very clearly, in the sense it's a big city, and big cities, in my experience, tend to be a little bit the same. And I'm speaking about big cities mostly in the West, you might say. So I don't want to generalize from that experience, but yeah, I think there's something about if I take, for example, so Milan is a big city, right? And if I take, for example, my experience of eating, it was quite a zhuzhy restaurant, actually. It was an osteria, and there was just a sort of sense of the kind of warmth of the place in terms of how I was treated, the kind of pleasure of the families they're eating at this. So there's something about, and of course, and there's a lot of that is about Italian food and it's the strength of Italian food in terms of the kind of the glue, the cultural glue of the country. But yeah, I think I get the sense that there's warmth between people in a way that I think English people tend to be much more guarded. And of course, I can think of lots of exceptions, but you might say there are exceptions that prove the rule. I don't, it's dangerous. I'm on dangerous ground here. How does that make you feel?
I have spent the last 3.5 years being quite rudderless. I left somewhere without anywhere to go to, and then just floated to jobs. Some of them were very short term and not in the UK. So I did work in Sweden and in Finland and in Portugal. So I worked all over the place, and I don't think I learnt anything about the cultures that I was working in that were not in the UK, because I was very clearly a visitor.
Yeah.
And I was very clearly working in my own language.
Parachuting in, really.
Yeah, I was being brought in for very specific projects, and it was very targeted, and I was in, and I was going to be there for a while, and then I was going to be out. So there wasn't a sense that I was assimilating in any way. But moving around the UK, so I'm now in my third town. It's interesting because I don't recognise at all what you have just described.
Yeah.
And yet I recognise every single word of it. So let me try to make sense of that for myself, in that the people that I have met and begun to be in relationship with have been generous and warm and welcoming.
Hang on, you mean whereabouts are you talking about, though?
Everywhere that I've been. So these 3 different places: one in the northwest, one in the one in the Midlands,
but in the UK,
one
in the UK,
in the UK, one in the far southwest. All of the people that I've been in relation with have been lovely. But every time I've been somewhere, because I also in 2 of those places I stayed in hotels a lot and would eat in a variety of places because I didn't have a kitchen. I was so aware of how unwelcoming and how unfriendly those places were.
Oh.
There was a sense of distrust. There was a sense of unease. There was a sense of othering that was happening. And bearing in mind, we've said this before, I'm a middle-aged, white, cisgendered man. Things that look like me are so ubiquitous in cultural product and on streets, is what I mean. Yeah? It's a rare town that you can't find a man of my height, shape, with a beard and no hair.
Yeah, in the UK.
In the UK, exactly. Yeah, I'm only talking about my experience of being around and about in the UK. So that thing about people being guarded is something I've really experienced in exactly the same moment that I'm experiencing a real sense of welcome.
In workplaces.
Very odd. In workplaces.
That's so interesting, isn't it?
Want to make connections. They want to support you. And I've had obviously I've experienced people being dicks and doing that whole sort of positioning that happens in any workplace. And I think quite a lot in higher education. Of course I've experienced that, but that's in the minority. Most people have just been really warm and welcoming. So when you say that thing that you just said about being here, about being there to you, of course.
Sure.
It resonates really strongly, and at the same time is utterly unrecognizable, and it's such a weird. Yeah. It's a weird disconnect.
Yeah, and also I that's why I'm also I feel guarded about even making the generalization, because of course, as I said, there are I can think of many, many people who are just not like that at all, and I felt incredibly welcome. But I was just thinking that as you were talking, well, actually, there's or implicit in what you're saying is that workplaces create an environment in which people don't have to feel guarded or don't have to have that kind of sense of othering, which is different from walking into a restaurant somewhere in a West End town and you don't have any of those kinds of cues or assumptions about how it is that that person has stepped into this place.
I think what's made me reflect a little bit is how easily I've been sort of looked at askance. It's been quite arresting how cold the places that I have been are.
Yeah, it's hard.
And I find myself thinking, God, if I'm finding this cold and if I'm finding this sense of rejection so
imagine if you didn't speak English.
Imagine if you didn't speak English. Imagine if you didn't look like a ubiquitous thing like I look like.
Like a north. I mean, you're from the north as well. You know.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. And I totally. I can. I can code switch relatively easily. You know, when I'm up north, my accent becomes considerably stronger.
Can you do it a little bit now?
No, because it's not something that it's not a conscious thing. I'm not trying to do it. It's just your voice picks up the cadences and the rhythms.
I know
so
that
it becomes a little bit more.
Yeah, because I mean, I know exactly what you mean. If I speak to New Zealanders,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I know that Sting. You know, let's to bring it back to Sting. Of course, all roads lead to Sting. It's a string to Sting, and that I know he got a lot.
Can I say?
Yeah,
I have had some feedback about describing Sting's mouth as like a prolapse bottom, and somebody did say it was the finest description ever. I'm quite proud of that. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Going back to Sting.
Yeah, that he got a lot of stick for dropping his he's from Geordie. Thank you. His Geordie accent. You know that he became a little bit. But I imagine he was. I don't know. But I imagine there's a certain amount of that assimilation going on, which is what we do when we're fitting in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really hard to keep an accent if you don't live in the place where people are using it all the time. I mean, it's not that it disappears altogether. You know, it will be a strange day when I say bath or laugh or class.
Bath.
Because it's always going to be bath and laugh and class. I'm always going to have those slightly flatter vowels in the middle of words. But already I can hear that I said always, not always, like I would have done at one point.
Yeah, right.
It would have been much closer to the back of my throat, and my mouth would have been slacker when I said always. So it would have been
I had
always.
Had a beautiful moment with 3 Italians this afternoon discussing the difference between flour and flower. And they're just looking at me askance, like, what the fuck? And I'm saying, you have to remember my accent's a particular version of English as well. You know?
Yeah, my God, yeah. My dad, when they still lived here in the UK half the year, they had some of their Portuguese friends come to visit them in the UK, and they had a great time by all accounts because it snowed. Now, just to put this into context,
Perfect.
My parents, when they lived in the UK, lived in Cumbria. So they lived almost on the border of Scotland. Very hard winters. Yeah, so you were guaranteed snow every year. And I think their friends had visited them in April. And it was an unseasonably cold spring. But it snowed. And there was a couple, and the woman of the couple was just so excited to see snow because she'd never seen snow. She was in her 40s, 50s. She'd never seen snow in real life. So
amazing.
Yeah. The guy Antero was like, "Oh God, this is shit." But they went to see.
It is a little bit like that, isn't it? This is amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my God, this is shit.
Yeah, it's amazing. Oh, it doesn't stop. Fucking hell. But they went to see a castle while they were there. Anyway, cut to a couple of months later, and my dad is he's having dinner out with his friend Antero in Portugal. And there were a couple of English people who were on holiday in the area, and they'd been invited round to Antera's house. And he was saying, I went to England not long ago. I didn't like the snow, but I really liked the castles. And this woman said, "Oh, the castles." And he just looked at me, and he looked at me and went, "No, you're saying it wrong." With no
beautiful,
with no sense of the nuance of what was happening in that kind of north-south divide.
The
he
class,
was just saying,
the class.
No. You've got that word wrong. I'm so sorry, lady.
In fact, it's not even nuance, really. It's kind of brutal divisions in class, Yeah, I guess I'm trying to return to that thing about it's a little bit like where we feel comfortable, isn't it? Yeah, and I'm uncomfortable with it as well because it's also part of that kind of question about, well, who's not in those spaces? It's almost like it's the road more traveled, isn't it? It's like the gravitational pull towards sameness. Do you know today, Lee Miller, I went for a swim in a river.
Oh, you lucky duck.
And I went with another choreographer, actually, who's here and who I hadn't met before. And she and I were... it was freezing cold, as you can imagine, the water. And then these big rocks that we were lying against, sunning ourselves and getting warm from the heat of the rocks. It was just beautiful. Really, really beautiful.